As a gym rat or avid gym goer, chances are you've looked at YouTube videos on what exercises to perform for certain muscle groups, as I once did. Most channels you watch will usually recommend the same exercises. Makes sense. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Stick with the tried and true method. But in amongst this sea of exercise recommendations, there are 5 that I no longer perform in my own routine. And well, my physique hasn't suffered. It's only improved since ditching these exercises. Not to say that removing these exercises specifically is what caused me to grow, but based on what you hear online, you'd think you'd have to do these exercises or you wouldn't grow/you'd shrink. The way to grow a muscle is to train it with resistance/volume via its intended movement pattern. You can train it via lactate buildup, aka chase the pump, which can be achieved by doing drop sets, occlusion training and whatnot, but let's just keep it simple here. Just go for more resistance, more weight, or more volume. Do more sets and reps. So, to get a muscle to grow, you train it in its intended movement pattern with more weight, or more sets and reps over time. Ideally gun for more weight since you can't just keep adding sets and reps, or you'd be in the gym for 50 hours a week, and then you can't even recover from the training you are doing in the gym. Now, intended movement patterns just means you're doing what the muscle was designed to do. Example, the function of your chest is to bring your elbow across your body. Think of bench press, dumbbell press, incline press, flies, dips. Look at where your elbow is at the start of the movement compared to when you're at the end of the range of motion. Yeah, I know there's a dip variation that keeps your elbows in the same horizontal position, but that's a tricep-focused dip, in which you have a more narrow grip. Whatever way you want to slice it, growing your pecs is achieved via movements that bring your elbow across your body. For your biceps, its intended function is to flex the elbow joint, aka curl your arm. Every bicep movement does this. Incline curl, dumbbell curl, close grip curl, easy bar curl, hammer curl, whatever. Notice the common theme? The idea is to train the muscle via its intended movement pattern. For your triceps, the function is to extend the elbow joint. Tricep pushdowns, kickbacks, overhead extensions, even being used as a secondary muscle in movements like the bench press, the function is to simply extend the arm. But anyway, this isn't an anatomy session. Point is, if you want to grow a muscle, train it via resistance/volume via its intended movement pattern. Once you look at training from this lens, things become much easier to figure out whether or not they're a good exercise. So let's get started. Here are 5 popular gym exercises that I no longer perform in my gym routine. 1. Bulgarian split squats. Why? Because I hate them. Okay, that's a joke. Not really, but I had excluded this from my routine for ages, but I've split up my training now to have 2 separate leg days. That way, I don't have to spend 30 minutes preparing to hip thrust 200 kilos each session, because that gets exhausting and boring after starting a leg day like that for 2 years straight. Okay, let's get into the 5 real exercises that I no longer do. 1. Bench press. What? Is this another joke? No, it's not. Why aren't I performing this very common and popular exercise? Well, 2 things. 1. Intended function, and 2. Time. So as mentioned earlier, you train a muscle via its intended movement pattern. Well, although bench press does bring the elbow across the body, you don't get the full range of motion with this, since obviously you can't just turn bench press into a fly. Bench press is still good since it's the exercise you can go heaviest with in this movement pattern. Like, you're always going to be able to bench press more weight than you can dumbbell fly. But I have another substitute for bench press that I've been performing instead, since when I'm benching, my intention is to grow my pecs. I have no interest in powerlifting. So if I can find a movement that performs the function of the pec better than the bench press, despite not being able to lift as much, then I'm going to do that. What am I doing instead to get more range of motion? Well, I'll be talking about that in another video. I do still do pressing movements, namely dumbbell flat bench, better range of motion compared to the barbell since your elbows can come out further, and you can go deeper, although you can't go as heavy. but that's not the substitute/new exercise that I've been doing to grow my pecs. Again, I'll mention that in a separate video. Reason 2 for not including bench: time. By the time it takes me to warm up properly for my first set of bench press, I could have done 2 to 3 sets of another exercise instead. I still warm up my rotator cuff muscles before each upper body workout regardless, but it would take even longer to warm up for bench press, whereas other exercises, like the new one I've recently implemented, I can basically jump straight into a working set without the risk of injury, providing I warmed up my rotator cuff. You gotta warm up and protect the rotator cuff, the only free-moving joint in the whole body. If you want to know what I do for my rotator cuff, I've mentioned it in prior videos before. So at the start of every upper and arm session, I'll do this little warm-up that you're seeing now. So it's basically like lucky cats but with a cable, because there's more like resistance throughout the whole movement. If you do these with a dumbbell, there's not a lot of resistance at the top of the movement, and I believe it can actually put a little bit more strain on your joints than what you'd prefer if you use it with a dumbbell. It's got something to do with the fact that if you use a dumbbell, you're fighting against gravity, whereas if you use a cable, you've just got constant tension through the cable. Again, like I mentioned before, how I used to be a PT, I used to know all this stuff in depth. I've done this for years now, and I haven't forgotten why I do it, I just forgot the intricate details of why I do it, but it's something like that. So if you're gonna do this as a warm-up, just use cables as opposed to dumbbells. So this warm-up you're seeing, it also warms up muscles in your rotator cuff. I believe the ones that this one targets is your supraspinatus from memory. There's like 4 muscles in your rotator cuff. Yeah, so actually I believe this movement actually targets at least 3 of the rotator cuff muscles. So the 4 rotator cuff muscles are your supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and your subscapularis. Now, out of these, your subscapularis is the strongest of the lot, so it doesn't really get injured too much, but the other 3 are ones you need to be wary of. So that's why I do these warm-ups that you're seeing, because they target these muscles specifically. Now, it's important with that cable abduction that you just saw, where it's important to keep your elbow to the side. When you do these, don't let it flare out, otherwise it just turns into a lateral raise. Again, eventually I'll probably do a video delving really in depth with my workout routine, but so I do that lucky cat with a cable, I do that cable abduction thingo, whatever you want to call it, and then I do this thing, I call it a liberty raise. Now, I learnt this from Sebastian Oreb, aka Australian strength coach, and he learnt this off Andrew Locke. So the reason you do this movement is because at this particular angle, you're optimally targeting your serratus muscle. Now, your serratus plays a role in stabilizing your scapula because it is connected to your scapula, and stabilizing your scapula helps keep your rotator cuff muscles strengthened. So it's a little sort of connect the dots type thing. Strengthen your serratus, keeps your scapula more strengthened, if that's a word, which keeps your rotator cuff muscles more healthy. So that's just a really brief outline of my warm-up. I'll always do these 3 movements. I may do more, but usually I find that this is more than sufficient to keep my shoulders healthy. So to summarize, I don't bench anymore since 1. The only reason I do bench press in the first place can be done better with another exercise I've implemented. So like I do bench press to grow the pecs. How do you grow pecs? Train it in its intended movement pattern. There's another exercise that trains your pec in its intended movement pattern better than the bench press. And 2, it takes longer to set up as opposed to other exercises. If you're new around these parts, I have a lot on my plate. There's plenty of other things I can be doing instead of being at the gym longer. Example, additional career advancement, working extra shifts, making more YouTube videos, surfing the charts more, checking out real estate information, etc. 2. Dips, both versions, chest and tricep focused. The main reason I ditched them was because they were causing me shoulder issues. I know how to properly perform the movement, but I was still getting shoulder pains, which I have seen is kinda common. The dips just simply bug people's shoulders, and I am one of them, which is weird since I used to be able to do weighted dips back in 2015 to 2016. I legit was doing like 20 kilo weighted dips before I could even do a single pull-up, which makes no sense at all. If you've seen my back, it's basically the strongest part of my physique, mostly attributed to weighted pull-ups, at least that's what I suspect. Other than weighted pull-ups, there's been no other noteworthy exercises that I've done, no really heavy barbell rows or anything. So the fact that once upon a time I was doing weighted dips before I could even do a weighted pull-up is odd. So I avoid this common exercise because, for whatever reason, it just doesn't suit my body. But, speaking of barbell rows, exercise 3, barbell rows. Now, I basically don't do this for the same reason as bench press. 1, its intended function is filled with other movements, and 2, it takes longer to warm up for. Build up to a working weight, rest, and then not to mention unloading the bar and whatnot later. But you also have the lower back thing. When you have to set yourself up whilst you row, there's going to be pressure on your lower back. I know there's certain angles you can bend to mitigate this, but no matter what way you slice it, when you're bending over, there's going to be pressure on your lower back. Now, it wasn't debilitating or anything, but I've seen other people my age, which is 28 by the way, they already have chronic back issues/pain, so I'm going to protect my spine as best I can. So removing a largely unnecessary exercise that causes some lower back pain was a no-brainer. I can't do much about mitigating potential lower back issues via my jobs, which is an office job where you sit a lot, and a wagey job where you lift awkwardly shaped objects. I know you bend your hips and bring the weight as close to your body as possible, like you would with a deadlift, in order to reduce the torque on your lower back or whatever, but sometimes with manual labor jobs or pseudo-manual labor jobs like the wagey gig, it doesn't matter what precautions you take, there are going to be some instances at work where you just have to deal with the lower back issues. Now, I mentioned deadlifts just then. Funny I mentioned this. Exercise 4, deadlifts, conventional and sumo. A very common argument in the case for the deadlift is, it's a full body exercise. Yes, it is. By the time it takes to warm up and set up and work up to a working weight is crazy. I used to do conventional and sumo deadlifts back in the uni days, and I was doing it a bit in 2021 too, maybe 2022 as well, but like with bench press, I have no intentions of powerlifting. I'd suck at it anyway, and its only real function in my routine is filled up by other exercises. Now, deadlift is still a good foundational exercise. It's good to build up the general overall body strength. I'd 100% suggest it for beginners, simply for the functional everyday life thing. I was still doing deadlifts for a while, for this same reason too, just to build up overall body strength so I didn't break at my wagey job. But once you've built up enough of a strength base, really, you have enough. I can deadlift more than 100 kilos. Yes, I know, impressive, hey. I should really be competing at the international level with this type of strength. But really, 100 kilos is way heavier than whatever else I'd encounter at work/everyday life. So I'm done in that sense. I've built up the foundation. Now that the foundation is done, I can work on sculpting the overall artwork. So let's talk about why the deadlift isn't a great exercise for building muscle. 1, most of the movement involves a concentric or isometric muscle contraction. There is no eccentric part to a conventional or sumo deadlift. Do you slowly lower the weight when you do a deadlift? Nope. You generally slam that B back to the ground. For those who don't know, concentric is when the muscle shortens, basically the first half of the movement in any exercise, aka pushing the dumbbells up in a dumbbell flat press. Eccentric is when the muscle lengthens, basically when you return to the starting position of the lift, aka when the dumbbells in a flat bench come back down. Isometric is when the muscle basically doesn't lengthen or shorten. I'll touch on that in a second. Now, the science, last time I checked, showed that the concentric part of a movement wasn't as effective for muscle growth as the eccentric. I don't know, I'll try and find the nerd science stuff I found back in the day, but I remember seeing this. Maybe I'll see what ChatGPT says when it comes time to edit the video. The eccentric part of the movement causes more muscle damage. I know that. But whether or not this directly translates to more muscle growth and whether or not the concentric portion is not as effective for muscle growth, I'm not 100% sure at this time. I'm going purely off memory here. I'm typing this script as I'm sitting in my brother's car on the way to the airport, so I can't really fact check what I'm typing since I need to conserve phone battery for the plane trip, but I'm fairly sure this was a thing. Whether or not recent science studies have debunked this, I don't know. I haven't been immersed in the fitness stuff for years now. I have seen some meatheads online are memeing the science-based guys. Yeah, sure, whatever. The science-based guys can go overboard with that stuff. Like spending 5 seconds on an eccentric for more time under tension. Dude, just do more reps with a regular concentric/eccentric tempo. But the point is, I'm sure there's some actual anatomical science behind concentric-only movements not being the best for muscle growth. It's a reason why Olympic weightlifters aren't all mass monsters. Yeah, they're in good shape, but considering what they can lift, you'd think they'd be bigger than they are. I guess that could also be due to just hypertrophy versus strength training. And I suppose it's also why sometimes, in the gym, people will get someone else to perform the concentric movement for them, and then they control the eccentric. Such as someone lifting the bar up in a bench press, and the lifter just controls the weight down, or when someone jumps up in a pull-up, then slowly lets himself down. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who's seen that, but to my point, deadlifts are a mostly concentric movement, which is why they're not a great muscle builder, in my opinion. Definitely a good movement overall for strength, but it's absolutely not necessary to build an aesthetic physique. As for the isometric part, the leg part of the movement is mostly concentric, and the back is mostly in an isometric position, meaning the back muscles neither lengthen or shorten. That would be like, instead of lifting up and down, you just hold the weight in the same position. Your back isn't performing a concentric or eccentric movement in a deadlift. I would hear over and over again back in the day about how the deadlift is a great exercise for your back. I just ran with it, but I was always somewhat confused at the back of my mind, no pun intended. I'm like, why is this so good for my back? I'm not really doing anything with it here other than using it to hold myself up. I mean, I've built a pretty good back, and I've never deadlifted anything above 175 kilos. I did that once when I was at uni, and it was kind of a show-off/spontaneous thing with the gym crew. Usually, I'd only hover around 150 to 160 kilos, and I also haven't done a proper conventional deadlift in more than 2 years. And my back hasn't shrunk. If anything, it's grown. So, put 2 and 2 together, deadlifts aren't really a good back builder. Now, I guess just because I did something different doesn't mean it won't work for most people. I have seen some people with solid backs say they got it from deadlifting, but did they really? These guys were usually hardcore gym rats, so they'd be doing other back movements too. It'd be like if I said I got my round shoulders from a Smith machine incline press. There could be a slight correlation, but chances are it was something else you did that gave you those results. Deadlifts building a big back didn't play out in my personal training journey, and it doesn't really make sense when you look at it from an anatomical perspective either. Look, you do you. Last time I checked, the video title was something like 5 popular gym exercises I no longer do. It wasn't titled, if you do any of these listed 5 gym exercises, you're an idiot. You do you, but I'm giving you fuel for thought. If you're like me years ago, you would have heard everyone just say deadlifts are great back builders, or muscle builders in general, so you just stick to this movement, which takes away time and energy you could be spent more efficiently building up your specific target muscle goals, rather than just basically spending time working on a powerlifting movement. So to wrap up point 4, deadlifts are a popular exercise that I no longer do. Well, conventional and sumo anyway. I do stiff-legged deadlifts for the hamstrings, since there is an eccentric component to that particular lift that doesn't exist with conventional or sumo. Exercise 5, the last one for this video, the Arnold press. Honestly, I have no idea why people even do these. If you don't know this exercise, you basically twist the weight down and then twist it back up as you're doing a regular shoulder press. Obviously, this exercise was invented by Arnold Schwarzenegger, hence why people do it, because if he did it and got that big, then it must work for me too. That's how it goes, right? So it seems the reason for this exercise is to work all three heads of the shoulder at once. Not quite sure exactly how it benefits the rear delts, since their function is shoulder extension, pulling the arms back. You're not doing that in this movement. It's why many people don't train their rear delts directly, since they basically get hit with most back movements. But either way, even if the argument was more front delt, well, a normal shoulder press already does this. Your front delt's function is shoulder flexion, aka move your arms up, which you're mimicking with a shoulder press, but what does the twirling of the arm have to do with anything? It also doesn't really impact the medial delt, the most important one in terms of aesthetics, since the function of your medial delt is shoulder abduction, aka move your arms to the side. My next video will go into this a fair bit. Now, this movement can be good for those with shoulder impingement, since as you're twirling the weight back down, you create more space in the, subacromial space. This is the spare space between the acromion and rotator cuff. These two rubbing/touching can cause pain for some people. As you come down in a regular shoulder press, this can cause pain for some people, especially if they have an inflamed bursa, since there's less subacromial space. Look, I'm not going to go into an anatomy lesson here, but all you need to know as a gym bro, doing Arnold press can reduce/eliminate the pain caused from this general shoulder press movement in some people. So the Arnold press does have that benefit. However, I don't have those shoulder issues, and I think most people don't do Arnold press for the sake of shoulder pain. They do it just because someone told them to. So really, there's no need to do this unless you have some sort of shoulder injury. Okay, well, it's still a good exercise, right? Well, kinda. See, if you're doing this twirling thing, in general, you can't lift as much. So you're reducing the resistance, which is not what you want when you're trying to grow. But as I mentioned before, how I'm doing a different exercise instead of bench press, despite the fact I can't lift anywhere near as heavy as I can on the bench press, then wouldn't that same logic apply here? Maybe I can't lift as much with the Arnold press, but I'm getting more range of motion in exchange, right? Well, as mentioned before, not really. You're still basically using the same range of motion. Maybe there's a little bit more with the Arnold press since you're twirling your hand down a bit below your shoulder level, which you wouldn't get if you were doing a conventional shoulder press. Maybe, I don't know, depends on how you perform it, but this slight extra range of motion is when the shoulder is mostly inactive anyway. It's more so your wrist doing the extra range of motion. Like you watch yourself in the mirror performing an Arnold press and just perform the little twirling movement at the bottom of the lift and tell me how much your shoulder actually gets worked in that little section on its own. So this is why I don't do the Arnold press. I don't usually do regular shoulder presses either, for reasons I'll talk about in an upcoming video. But for the Arnold press specifically, I don't have shoulder impingement issues that require a variation to the regular shoulder press. It doesn't actually impact the other shoulder heads any better than the regular shoulder press. You generally can't lift as heavy from what I've seen and in my own experience. And I have other shoulder movements that are better for my aesthetic goals, namely exercises that really specifically target the medial delt through its intended function. So those are 5 pretty common exercises you see recommended / you'd see in the gym that I don't do myself. My physique hasn't gone backwards since I ditched these movements, it's gone forward. And in an upcoming video, I'll talk about 3 secret or lesser known exercises that I do, lol.
I'm doing my civic duty.
That has really helped grow my physique personally. So what are your thoughts? Any common exercises that you don't do anymore? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. That is all.